It could be worth over $60,000. You might even have one right now without ever knowing it. This is the story of Australia's most mysterious and valuable coin. Humble, forgotten pennies that have become icons of a nation's past. They are more than money. They are memories. They tell stories of hardship, of history, of war, survival, and astonishing luck. And we begin with one coin, the king of all Australian pennies, the elusive, the legendary 1930 penny. Back in the grip of the Great Depression, Australia was a nation struggling to survive. Jobs vanished overnight. Bread lines grew longer. Every penny counted. And we mean that literally. But strangely, in the year 1930, no pennies were officially minted for circulation. At least, that's what the Royal Australian Mint thought. What happened next has become one of the most incredible accidental rarities in numismatic history. Sometime during 1929, as the mints were preparing dies and leftover stock, a small number of pennies dated nifty were unintentionally struck, likely as test coins or using discarded dies. No records exist. No one even noticed. These coins quietly entered circulation, mixed with others unmarked, unnoticed, uncelebrated. For decades, they were used to buy apples, train tickets, newspapers, passed from hand to hand forgotten, until one day, collectors realized something was missing in their albums. A year was missing, and when a 1930 penny was finally found, the hunt began. Today, fewer than 1,500 examples are known to exist. Some say the number is under 1,000. Most are heavily worn. Only a few pristine examples survive, and when they appear at auction, the world stops. In 2021, a near mint condition 1930 penny fetched over $60,000, one sold years earlier for nearly $500,000 due to its exceptional state and provenance. For a piece of bronze just 30.8 meter wide, that's more valuable than gold, gram for gram, and yet some people still stumble across them in old piggy banks, hidden in inherited collections or buried in garden soil. Every collector dreams of it, the day you hold a 1930 penny in your hand. It's not just the value, it's the story. You're holding a mistake that was never meant to exist, a survivor of Australia's darkest economic hour. It's history you can touch. But the 1930 penny isn't alone in its legend. There's another, smaller in size, but equally powerful in mystery and value. The 1923 halfpenny. Unlike the 1930 penny, this coin was intended for circulation, but only around 15,000 to 20,000 were ever made. The lowest number of halfpennies struck in Australia's Commonwealth era. Why so few? That answer lies in the chaotic years following World War I. The Melbourne Mint faced supply issues, equipment failures, and budget limitations. In 1923, production was abruptly halted. Few halfpennies made it to the public. For decades, the 1923 halfpenny flew under the radar. Then, as collectors began building full-year sets, they noticed a strange gap. Again, the 1923 issue became infamous for its absence. Prices began to rise, quietly at first, and then skyrocketed. Today, a well-preserved 1923 halfpenny can fetch $30,000 to $40,000, and even a worn example might be worth thousands. Only a handful in top condition exist, with the rarest commanding enormous sums at auctions in London and Sydney. Unlike the 1930 penny, the 1923 halfpenny wasn't an error. It was a casualty of circumstance, but its rarity makes it a cornerstone of any serious Australian collection. It's a coin that whispers to us from a fragile time, a time when Australia was finding its place in the world just 5 years after the First World War. A time when money was tight and half a penny still meant something, and now We travel back further still, to the 1925 penny, a coin often overlooked, but silently climbing in value over the years. At first glance, the 1925 penny doesn't seem rare. Over 1.6 million was struck, not a small number, but here's the twist. Most were so heavily circulated that finding one in good condition is a true challenge. They were used hard during difficult times, inflation, unemployment, economic strain. The 1920s weren't as roaring in Australia as they were in other parts of the world. By the time collectors began preserving coins in the 1940s and 1950s, the 1925 pennies were already badly worn. Today, high-grade examples are incredibly scarce. A top-condition 1925 penny can sell for $10,000 to $15,000, and some uncirculated ones are locked away in private collections, never to see the light of day again. Why do people care so much? Why do we assign value to these ancient pieces of bronze? Because coins aren't just metal. They're relics of the everyday. They pass through the hands of soldiers, school teachers, mothers, and miners. They bought bread during the Depression. They fell between floorboards. They were flipped for luck, kept for years, and sometimes, just sometimes, they survived. Collectors aren't just hunting for money, they're searching for stories. And no story is more alluring than that of the 1930 penny, the ghost of a coin that was never meant to exist. The 1923 halfpenny, born of failure and forgotten history. And the 1925 penny, quietly enduring the weight of time. At first, the 1920 penny seems ordinary. Over 3 million were struck, more than twice the mintage of the 1925 penny. But collectors soon discovered something astonishing. Tiny raised dots placed in specific positions on some coins. They were so small, so insignificant to the untrained eye, that most people never even knew they existed. But to a collector, these dots are everything. 3 major varieties exist. The dot above the bottom scroll, the dot below the bottom scroll, and the incredibly rare dot above the top scroll. Each one created unintentionally by slight modifications or deterioration, and each on sending shockwaves through the collecting world. Why were these dots added? Were they die markers to track production batches? Emergency replacements from other mints? No one knows for sure. What we do know is that their rarity transformed the 1920 penny from a common coin into a numismatic treasure. Today, examples of the dot above the top scroll penny in good condition can fetch over $25. Even worn versions command thousands, and fakes flood the market. As the demand continues to soar, they are coins born of confusion, preserved through curiosity, and elevated by obsession. And just 1 year earlier, something even more peculiar had happened. The 1919 penny, it was the first year Australian pennies were minted in significant numbers at 3 locations, London, Melbourne, and Sydney. You're all using different dyes and designs. That alone created a maze of varieties. But one stood out like a riddle carved in bronze. On some 1919 pennies, a small dot appears directly above the top scroll on the reverse side. To most people, it's nothing. A tiny bump, a flaw, maybe even a bit of dirt. But to coin historians, this mark meant everything. It indicated a mint dye variation, possibly produced at Sydney. Though debate continues to this day, the coin became known as the 1919 dot over top scroll penny, and it became one of the most studied and desired varieties of the year. Only a handful of verified examples exist in top condition. Their value? Depending on grade and authenticity, some have sold for $15,000 to $20,000 in the right auction, and in pristine state, that figure could be far higher. But more than value, this coin carries weight, historical weight. Imagine holding something from the very first major year of Australian penny production, a coin that marked a new chapter in a post-war nation, recovering from World War I, stepping forward into the 1920s with its own currency, its own identity, and a series of minting mysteries. These dots, barely visible, carry more story than 1,000 books. And just when you think you've seen it all, the Australian penny world throws one final dazzling jewel into the light. A coin so rare, most collectors will never even see one in person. A coin not made for pockets, but for prestige. The 1921 proof penny, only 6 are known to exist. That's right. Not 6,000, not 600, just 6. Proof coins were not made for general circulation. They were struck for dignitaries, for the archives, or as part of master collections, carefully pressed, sometimes multiple times, on specially prepared dies and polished planchets. They gleamed like medals. Their details were razor-sharp, their surfaces mirror-like. They were never meant to be spent. They were art, in the truest sense, and in 1921, for reasons still unclear, the Melbourne Mint produced a small handful of proof pennies. Perhaps they were presentation pieces, perhaps they were test strikes, but for decades, no one even knew they existed. When the first 1921 proof penny surfaced, it shook the numismatic world. Experts confirmed its status. The sharp rims, the satin finish, the flawless strike. It wasn't just rare, it was legendary. Today these coins are virtually priceless. The last known sale was over $1.5 million. AUD, they are locked away in museums, high-security vaults, or elite private collections. For most people, they live only in books, photos, and whispered conversations at coin shows, just when you think the Australian penny story has revealed all its secrets. The year 1931 arrives, quietly, modestly, but hiding something extraordinary. At a glance, it looks like a standard coin, but the 1931 penny is not just any old currency. It is a coin born from struggle, from scarcity, and from survival. You see, Australia was in the grip of the Great Depression. Factories shut down, families went hungry, and money, especially new money, was in short supply. In fact, the Royal Australian Mint produced almost no pennies in 1931. Most circulating coins were just leftovers from previous years. Yet, against the odds, a small batch of pennies was struck, and within that tiny release lies one of the rarest and most mysterious Australian coins of all. 2 major varieties of the 1931 penny exist. The first is known as the Indian obverse. It was struck using obverse dies from the Calcutta Mint, a carryover from Australia's earlier ties to British India. The second is far more intriguing, the infamous dropped 1 variety. On this coin, the final digit in the date, the number 1, is noticeably lower than the other digits. It's not a trick of the eye. It's real. A misaligned date punch during die production caused the last 1 to appear as though it had dropped. It's subtle, it's easy to miss, but for collectors, it's a holy grail. Why? Because this dropped 1 variety is incredibly rare. Only a handful of confirmed examples exist in collector hands today. High-grade versions have sold for $35,000 or more, and demand continues to grow with every passing year. It's a coin that speaks of hardship, a tiny bronze reminder of a year when Australia faced some of its darkest economic times, a penny that shouldn't exist but does. And if we turn the clock back a little further to the eve of World War I, we uncover another rarity. From across the world, the 1915 penny, minted not in Australia but in London. At the time, Australia lacked the capacity to meet all domestic coinage needs. So the Royal Mint in London stepped in, but instead of millions, only a limited number of pennies were struck, making this coin not just scarce, but loaded with symbolic weight. Each 1915 London minted penny was a reminder that Australia, though young and far from the British Isles, was still a part of the empire. Soldiers were being deployed, war was raging across Europe, and this small copper coin, forged in London and sent to Australian shores, carried with it the weight of a continent in conflict. Today, this coin is treasured by collectors not just for its rarity, but for its connection to that historic year. A decent 1915 penny can fetch over $5,000, depending on condition, but its true value lies in the emotional resonance, the knowledge that each coin passed through the hands of a people bracing for a long, uncertain war. Even earlier, in 1914, a similar story unfolded. The 1914 penny, though more common than its 1915 sibling, was still struck in comparatively low numbers, and most of them were used, circulated, and worn down through the years. But what makes the 1914 penny so special today is its first year of war status. Imagine holding that coin in your hand. The same year Australian troops were sent to foreign battlefields. The same year the world changed forever. That small copper penny witnessed the birth of the Anzac legend and carries, in its simple design, the echoes of those who lived and fought through the storm. Collectors prize high-grade examples, especially with a clear king's portrait and minimal wear. Values can range from $1,500 for worn versions to well over $10,000 for top-tier coins. But again, it's not just about the numbers. It's about the connection, the tangible, touchable link to one of the most defining years in Australian history. And then we jump forward, past the wars, past the Depression, into the post-war glow of the 1940s, a period of rebuilding, of rebirth. The 1946 penny might seem at first like a modern coin, but it holds a hidden rarity that few people realize. It was the first penny struck after World War II and the last to be made in a truly limited quantity. Because of post-war rationing, copper was scarce. The mint produced fewer pennies than in most years before or after. Only about 240,000 were made, one of the lowest mintage numbers for any Australian penny. What makes this coin so fascinating is how underappreciated it was for years. Most people just assumed it was a regular post-war coin. It was used, spent, lost, forgotten, and now decades later, collectors are realizing just how few high-quality examples remain. In uncirculated condition, a 1946 penny can be worth $15,000 to $25,000, and perhaps even more, depending on market demand and provenance. Its scarcity combined with its modernity makes it one of the most surprising sleepers in Australian numismatics. So if this journey through Australia's most valuable pennies has sparked your curiosity, don't stop here. Like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into rare coins, and tell us in the comments what's the most surprising coin you've ever come across. Because sometimes the greatest treasures are already in your hands.